Hello, welcome to the second episode of User-Friendly AV. Today I want to talk about touchscreen interfaces, specifically creating custom UIs for control systems with touch panels like these guys. Or, well, they're more modern versions. If you're not a programmer, you may not realize that creating a user interface for a panel like that quite often starts with a completely blank slate. So, there's templates and themes and stuff like that, but it's not always as simple as just like dropping a logo in and like setting the correct number of source buttons. If you're a programmer, chances are you've probably encountered that blank slate before. So you know how intimidating it can be when you have like all these options and you don't really know where to start. So years ago, Infocom, back before they were known as Avixa, put together their dashboard for controls guide to help AV programmers with that very problem. It was released in 2005, and that was like a great guide for providing guidance on layouts and button size and a bunch of other design conventions for the time. However, it was also released at a time when a touchscreen was like a bit of a novelty. So the AV industry could kind of define its own design conventions to a certain extent because most users were coming into these systems, to these touchscreens, with very little experience with a touchscreen interface outside of like a specific use case, like a public kiosk or an ATM or some other sort of specialized hardware. It wasn't like, ubiquitous. Like people just didn't really see touchscreens, all that often. I mean, they were out there, but they weren't like super common. So they had fewer expectations on how a touch panel in like a boardroom or a classroom or whatever would really operate because they just didn't really have all that much to compare it to. Even just like the appearance of these old touch panels is just like really kind of unique. The bezel, the shape of the screen. It's got hard buttons on the bottom here. It's kind of weird. The screen feels different than, what we're used to now. That was okay because people they didn't really encounter anything else other than that. So it was already kind of a unique thing. And they didn't really have these pre-built expectations coming into it. That all changed when the iPhone was released in 2007. So suddenly touchscreens just became mainstream, right? So from 2008 to 2009 alone, actually, touchscreen adoption among smartphone users grew by 159%, which is like pretty crazy. I mean, that's just insane growth. And some of you might be thinking, and this caught me off guard when I first saw that stat, is, there were smartphones without touchscreens. And yes, there were. There was the BlackBerry and a bunch of others. And there were some with touchscreens, but they weren't like super common. And the fact that it kind of made me sit and pause for a second and say, was there actually a smartphone without a touchscreen? I think that really demonstrates like how big of a shift it was and how like just a massive change, the iPhone and things like that have really made. So suddenly you have this large portion of the user group coming to our systems with these higher expectations of how a touchscreen UI works because they're already living with one in their pocket. Everybody's got one of these days, right? So that even becomes more pronounced after the iPad is released in 2010. And I mean, come on. How many times have you heard a user call the touch panel, it's the iPad on the table is not working or whatever. Like, oh, I went and hit the iPad on the table, right? Just because that's what people recognize and that's how they look at it and that's how they think of it. And that's because these users are coming to these systems with a completely different mental model than what they were coming to it before. If you're unfamiliar with that term, mental model, it refers to the collection of thought processes and memories about how something works. So it's basically like an understanding or an explanation of something that someone has based on their observations of the object, plus their past experiences with what they perceive to be a similar object or circumstance. So it's how we infer the use of something, and it helps us kind of predict how this thing is going to behave, when I do this certain thing if I hit this button, whatever. It helps me kind of predict that and understand how the system's going to work. So like, for example, if I walked up and I saw this sitting on a table, I could kind of infer that these white things on the bottom are buttons that I can press, because they kind of, they stick up a little bit. I can press them. They're kind of squishy. They can move. Presumably they would do something if I can press them. I'd also think that if there were any buttons on this screen, I'd be able to touch it and interact with it, because it kind of looks like other touch panels that I've come up with before, that I've seen in the past. So if I came up and saw this on the table, I would kind of know how to use it. That's kind of, the mental model that you're coming up with. And when we talk about creating intuitive user interfaces or user-friendly interfaces, what we're really talking about is kind of successfully matching the user's mental model with the design. So it behaves in a way that feels familiar and things are expected, and there's not really any surprises, because, I know when I hit this, it should press in, because that's my past experience and it does that, so it doesn't feel weird. So that's kind of what, intuitive really means, right? So when we want to create an intuitive touch panel for an AV system, we're really best served by studying the things that our customers are already most familiar with, which is the apps they use every day, especially on their smartphones, right? So this is actually kind of a key principle of UX design that really fits here. It's called Jacob's Law. In his book Laws of UX, John Jablonski, it's this book here, Laws of UX. John Jablonski defines this as the idea that users spend most of their time on other sites or apps than yours, and they prefer that your site or app works in the same way as all those other ones that they already know. And if we think of control systems as an app for a specific space, we can start to kind of see how that applies. So, I mean, if you just look at the way touch panels are made today, they don't look like this anymore. They look and feel more and more like iPads, right? Because that's what people are used to, and that's what they're expecting. And in fact, quite often, they are iPads or they're Android tablets that are, running a specialized app that launches this interface that we've designed. So to the user, they don't know and they don't care that there's a difference. They are using an app to control the AV system, and they'll have certain expectations about that, the way it should look and it should behave based on all the other apps that they've used, right? They know how to use all the other apps on their phone. They don't want to learn something completely new and a completely new way of doing things, because it appears to them that it's the same, and there's no good reason for them to learn a completely new way of doing things. So we can really use that to our advantage. We can kind of leverage their familiarity with those other apps to reduce the amount of effort that it's going to require them to learn the new system, and then we can make it feel intuitive or user-friendly. So what does that really mean in practice, right? So for me, I work with I work with a lot of corporate and higher education customers, and most of them usually already have a primary conferencing platform that they use throughout their organization. And so their users are already really familiar with how that works by this point. I mean, I'm recording this in 2023. I think we all know the past 3 years. We've all been on Teams. We've all been on Zoom. We've all been on WebEx, whatever. We've been conferencing for quite a while at this point. So everybody should know how their conferencing platform works. So before I start designing a custom UI for a customer like that, especially if it's, a space that's going to incorporate conferencing, which every space does now. I mean, let's be honest. So before I start designing that custom UI, I'll try to find out which platform they're using, and I'll try to get really familiar with how it works. So, maybe it's Teams, maybe it's Zoom. Let's say they use WebEx for all of their internal communication. So they're already really familiar with WebEx. So the next thing I'll do once I know which platform it is that I'll really spend some time using the app on my laptop and on my phone to try to get an understanding of how things work within that app. So I'll start making note of things like where the settings are, how you get to it, what things are called, what they look like, what does a button look like, or a volume slider, things like that. I'll look at the terminology that they use, like how things are worded, and what kind of icons they use. When do they use icons? When do they use text? Maybe they use both. So I'll try and use those various features. I'll use all the different features of the app. So I'll see what happens, when I make a call, how does it behave? What if I mute my microphone? Is there a special indicator for that? So for example, WebEx, the app on my phone has this little message pop up that says you have muted your call when you mute your mic, and it says you have unmuted your call when you unmute it. And if you go to this giant mute button mode, I'm not really sure what this mode is called, but if you swipe over to this mode, you can see that it says tap to mute or tap to unmute, depending on which state you're in, instead of just, mic mute or privacy or something like that. So those are the things that I'm really looking for and that I want to pay attention to, because it can be very useful when I go to design the UI. So maybe I have a privacy button, that's going to mute all of the microphones in the room. I want to make it familiar, and I want, the user to already understand what that means. So I want to call it the same things. I want to use the same terminology they're using. If I can do that little message pop up for, 5 seconds or whatever it is to say, you've muted your room or something like that, that'll make things feel a lot more familiar to the user. And it's less things that they have to learn. So all those little cues, if I can incorporate that, it'll make them feel like they already know how to use the system, right? Because they have already learned how to use it elsewhere. So then it's easy, right? It's intuitive, it's user-friendly, it's great. We're all happy about it. The users love it. So, there are going to always be parts of our UI that don't really match other apps all that well. I mean, routing is something that you don't really see all that often outside of like a specialized app or, AV systems. It's not something that you typically, find a video routing page on like Zoom, that sort of thing. So there are going to be those kind of weird things. It's just kind of the nature of what we do, especially when we're doing these really custom control systems that are like, really specific to a use case. Maybe they have a really, specific button that needs to call some sort of specific macro to that space, that sort of thing. So there's always going to be that kind of thing. But if you can make the rest of the interface feel really familiar and intuitive, then those little odd bits, they're going to feel a lot less intimidating for the user to pick up because, there's just less that they have to learn overall. So you'll get a little bit more leeway there with your users because they don't have to learn all that other stuff. So they've kind of got more like bandwidth to pick up those the little special quirky bits that are specific to that system. So they've already everything else is already second nature. They don't have to think about that too much. They can just kind of focus on those special bits, and it's really all about striking that balance, right, between the things that you have to teach them and the things that are second nature. So it's really just it's a lot about psychology. Honestly, you just have to know a lot of psychology when you're doing this. To know how to strike that balance and to make it easy when you can, and then that makes the harder bits a little bit easier for people to pick up. And like I said, it's UI and UX design is a lot of psychology, which is why I love it so much, because people are just really fascinating puzzles, and I do love puzzles. So anyways, I think that's going to lead me to my recommendation for this episode. In case you missed my first video, this is going to be my plan going on here. I'm going to try and recommend a book or some other resource that I found to be really helpful. So today I'm going to recommend this book. This is 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People by Susan M. Weinschenk, Ph.D. It's this really great intro into how people think and feel and remember things. And in fact, it's broken into 10 sections with titles like How People See, How People Remember, How People Think. So each category within that kind of contains like several principles with a page or two dedicated to each one. It's really kind of cool. Examples are things like, well-practiced skills don't require conscious attention. So it'll kind of dig into the background on that. It'll give you kind of some tips on how you might apply it. There's some other cool ones in here. One is, people create mental models, like I said. So it kind of gives you some some stuff on that. People identify objects by recognizing patterns. That's another cool one to look into. It's just a lot of really, really neat things. And like I said, they're all kind of broken down. So you see here, there's like, the thing to know, the 100 things to know, and kind of some background on it and some takeaways, for each one. It's pretty neat. A lot of it applies more to websites than AV control systems. Like there's stuff in here like, people respond better if there's a picture of somebody smiling on the web page. It's not really going to apply all that much. But there is actually a lot of stuff in here that I think is really useful. And I think it's just a really great read all around. It's pretty quick. It's easy to take it in very short chunks because of the way it's laid out. So it's nice when you don't have a whole lot of time to read. You can, read a page or two and you can get something nice out of it. So I would definitely check that out. It's a really cool book. I like it. So that's all I got for this episode. And maybe kind of short, kind of fast. But that's all I got for today. So hopefully there was something of value in there. Hopefully I didn't yammer too much. So if you have any comments for this episode, or you have any ideas for future episodes, please let me know. You can drop a comment here. You can also find me on Twitter at userfriendlyav. It's all one word. It's the same logo as what's on YouTube here, so you should be able to find that. And if you ever want to join me to chat about this stuff, that would be really awesome, because it is super weird for me to sit here and talk to myself. So it'd be really cool to have somebody else to talk to. I'll actually be heading to InfoComm this year for the first time ever. So if you see me there, please, stop and say hi, introduce yourself. I'd love to get to meet lots of people there. And if you would like to do a recap of UX and UI trends at the show with me, that would be awesome. So maybe I can find one or two people to do that with me, because I think that'd be really fun. So if you're interested, let me know. That'd be super awesome. Maybe we can make something like that happen. It'd be cool. But for now, thanks so much for watching. I hope you come back again. And until next time, have a good one. Thanks.